So I finished The Way of Kings and I have so much to talk about. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I want to talk about each and every character that had a large role in this book, what happened across the last 300 pages, and my predictions for what's coming up next. I have a feeling it's going to be quite a long video because so much happened and I enjoyed it so much. So let's jump into it. Of course, I have to start with Kaladin, our hero, my hero after this book. And I probably should have been able to guess what was coming next from Kaladin. When he first noticed that if he moved the bodies of the Parshendi that they didn't like it, but I didn't manage to guess what he was going to be doing with their body until the scene where he was like cutting up and getting the bones and putting them in a bag. So missed opportunity there. However, it was super effective and efficient what he did with the bones and the bodies of the Parshendi, and obviously it had a massive impact on how the final few scenes and overall the war is going to be fought. However, I'm making a prediction for further on, probably for next book at a minimum. I do think that the Parshendi are going to be pretty vital to the success of our guys. Then that's for a bunch of reasons, and I'm going to talk about those later. I think Kaladin will weep when he realizes why the Parshendi hate people messing with the bodies of their dead. And I can't make a guess as to why. It's going to be something very specific to their culture. But I think that Kaladin ends up getting to know them on a very personal level. And I think he's going to regret those actions. But right now he doesn't. So I flip over, and what I see before this next chapter is a map. And you can tell immediately from the map how terribly the battle is going to go and the level of betrayal that is about to occur from Sadeas. And I am a fool for trusting Sadeas. I would have been there with Dalinar waiting on the backup from Sadeas, because I basically just believed everything that Sadeas put out throughout the entirety of the book. First I didn't like him, then I liked him again, then didn't like him, and then recently I liked him, and now obviously I hate him alongside hopefully everybody else as well. What a little worm. So I can add him up there with Amaram as Alethi that I hope don't survive. However, I do think Sadeas will make it through the next book, and I'll explain a bit about what I think is going to happen there. But before that, we get the jewel in the crown of this book in particular. And I felt like cheering when it was apparent, even though I knew that was what was going to happen, that the bridge team was going to have to go back. Once it became apparent that, you know, they'd been abandoned and the bridge team was behind everybody else, that was the only logical next step. And there was a couple of pages or maybe even a chapter where they're kind of debating whether to go back or not, or whether to flee. And you knew the answer was always going to be they were going to go back and do the righteous and honourable thing, because it's Kaladin that we're reading. But I still felt like cheering when they decided to head back and everybody in Bridge Team 4 was up for it. And we got so many incredible moments, and I'm going to list just a couple and talk about them, but that whole battle scene was marvellous. It was fantastic, and although I do enjoy battle scenes and I enjoy army scenes, too much of a good thing can be bad, and I don't feel like we got too much of it, because we had battle scenes from so many interesting perspectives, and I don't mean perspectives of different people, but we had people with Shardplate and Shardblade fighting other people with Shardplate and Shardblade. We had people with Shardplate and Blade or Shardbearers fighting people without it, and then we had bridge teams with neither, trying to defend themselves without any weapons, and then we had regular people fighting regular people, and then we had the bridge teams with their spears. So you got a little bit of everything. It didn't feel monotonous. So obviously the moments which are fantastic is we get tall, full-size Syl, and she says some pretty cool stuff, and I'm going to have to read it off the notes. Well, she just says, you know, that she's an honest friend, which is why she was either drawn to Kaladin or why Kaladin was drawn to her. Either way, however it works. And obviously she goes through the Radiance chant. That's not the word I'm looking for, but life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. Those three things. And because she's an honest friend, that's why she was drawn to Kaladin. Like, that makes so much sense. And we also see Kaladin kind of accept that he's a surge binder, even though he doesn't really know the word for it. And he learns a little bit about what he's capable of, and there's so much more, as we know from Zeph. There's so much more that he can learn, but he also takes his first step to being a Radiant as something along the lines of the second mantra, which is protecting those who can't protect themselves. And he begins to shine, and he just completely deserves it. It was incredible. And there was one line, there was a lot of lines that were amazing. Brandon Sanderson did a great job, and I'm going to talk about that at the end, what I thought overall of the book and his performance. But there was one section where he says, Kaladin spun into them a living storm of steel, wood, and determination. And it was just great. Like, he painted the picture really well. And I feel like he took his time, with this book in a lot more than he had with some other books. And, that's on purpose. You can't always spend 1,300 pages on a book and not have a ton of conclusions to the storylines, because there's going to be 10 of them. And I really do think, and I've said this a few times and I'm going to bring it up again through the video, I really do think this is his kind of ode, not necessarily to the Wheel of Time, but him looking at Jordan's work and being like, okay, let me put my masterpiece out. And if there's something better than these books, and if this series stays to the standard of this book, it's going to be an amazing ride. But if there's something better than this in the Cosmere, I'll be very surprised. We obviously finally get the scene where his brother actually dies, and we get to understand, we not only see his prowess in full action with a spear and his ability on a battlefield, but we see why he needed to become that person. So it's good closure on that storyline in the past of Kaladin. And I think this book really is Kaladin's book, although we have a lot of Dalinar and quite a lot of Shallan as well, and obviously other people interwoven. But this is Kaladin's backstory. We get a lot about his past. And I'm very much hoping that we get similar for our other two main characters. I think somebody mentioned in a comment that maybe next book is Shallan's, so I'm excited about that. Although I don't like her as much as Kaladin, and I don't like anybody as much as Kaladin yet. I'm very motivated to learn more about her, and I do think she's an awesome character. And she has obviously so much in her backstory, and we'll talk about that because we learn a bit about it. But what's going to happen to Kaladin moving forwards? I'm very much torn. I love the position that he ended up in, and I'm going to talk more about that in the Dalinar section. What I think is going to happen is I think that his group of guys around him are way too interesting and way too diverse in the places that they're from and the things they can do for them not to travel the world together, trying to unite everybody. So I have a feeling that the Alethi are going to split in half after the death of Elokar, which is coming. And also I think Sadeas maybe gets the upper hand. Dalinar will be banished, and Dalinar and the Bridge Team 4 and potentially Dalinar's army as well will leave and kind of not join the Parshendi, but they will realise how important it is that the Parshendi are involved in their plight, and they will unite the Parshendi and then start to try and unite the world. So I feel like it's going to split from the main Alethi army, and Sadeas may get the upper hand on them. So that's my guess for where Kaladin goes from here. But that will probably happen much later in the second book, I think. Because we need Amaram to arrive, and I think maybe Kaladin exacting his revenge on Amaram is what will give Sadeas the political power to banish Kaladin and try to have his death, and maybe Dalinar will step in and be like, no, we need this guy, and that's what's going to cause the rift and cause Dalinar and his army to leave. And with the information that Jasnah and Shallan probably provide, I would guess they link up with them in the next book, they realise that having a relationship with the Parshendi is very important, and that's why they go in that direction. So next up, Dalinar at War. And the first thing with Dalinar's storyline is we do get some of Adolin as well. Adolin becomes a man. He realises that his father is the man, and that the reason why the codes are important, and he really becomes his father's son, and he steps into that role so that Dalinar can go and take his new role, which is going to be very much leading and guiding rather than being on the front line. So we will have the Blackthorn in some capacity, but not the capacity that we saw at the back end of this book. I think we're going to get Warlord and Leader Dalinar, at least for a short while. And we also see Shardplate pushed to its limit. We see its limitations, that it can be defeated, that it can be grown if you have a part of it, which is interesting information. Don't know what to do with that. We see that the Parshendi have a shard bearer as well, We see a lot through Dalinar's eyes, and his time at war is, he probably has the roughest time of everybody out there. And when he battles the Parshendi Shardbearer, the Parshendi Shardbearer says, "It is you, I found you finally," or something to that effect. Why are they looking for Dalinar? I'm not certain, but I think it's something to do, well, it would be weird if it wasn't something to do with the visions he was getting. Yeah, I don't know exactly why, obviously, otherwise that would be very impressive, but it's definitely something to do with the visions that he was getting. Oh, I don't know, maybe somebody else is getting visions of him. Maybe there's a Parshendi version of him, but he is important to the Parshendi and what's going to be happening in the future. And as I said before, Kaladin and Dalinar were looking for each other. And as I said before, Kaladin and Dalinar were looking for each other. They both had the ideals the other was looking for to prove each other right and prove each other wrong. And once that had happened and they got back to the camp, I had no idea that Dalinar was going to trade his Shardblade for Kaladin and the bridge team, but that was so poetic and it just made so much sense. Like, there was such a full circle moment and I never saw it coming, basically. And Sanderson, well done, because that felt very satisfying when it happened. And it was good because you really felt both sides of the story, especially Kaladin's mistrust and borderline hatred for all Light Eyes and how it was nullified by Dalinar giving up something that was truly priceless. And he gave it up for his ideals in not exactly the same way, but in a very, very similar way that Kaladin did as well. So they can see eye to eye with each other. So he gives Kaladin a bridge team for their new role as like his security. And that almost guarantees that Zeph and Kaladin will cross paths and realize that they both are Surge Binders. And I don't know what will happen from there, but we will get some story progression from there, which will be very interesting, obviously. I do think, as I mentioned before, Elokar will die, I think, in this next upcoming book. I also think that Amaram will die, and I don't think Sadeas will die in this next book. I think that Sadeas will split the Alethi down the middle and force a uniting of the Parshendi and Alethi, Dalinar's Alethi. And I'm very excited for Jasnah Shallan to join this storyline, even though it is fun when everybody's spread out. But what I would guess is that they join this storyline, although we get different perspectives, and maybe we get some new characters brought in as more main characters. So let's talk about Dalinar's visions. And he gets a ton of visions, and I wrote a ton of notes, but I truly don't have time to talk about every last little theory I have because there's so much good information in there. But I want to talk about the last one, which was actually a repetition of one of the first ones, if not the first vision that he actually gets. And it becomes clear that the visions aren't specifically for him. So maybe he's fulfilling some kind of prophecy, because it is for him, but not because he's Dalinar, because of whoever he is, because of these prophecies he has, the position he has, so to speak. And the Almighty, which I would guess is one of the shards, is the person who is speaking with him. And the Almighty has died, and the Almighty is the person who kind of created humanity. And there is definitely more than 2 shards on this planet. There has to be. I'd be surprised if there isn't like 4 or 5 on this. Well, they normally come in pairs. So if there isn't 4 on this planet, I'd be quite surprised. And he gives us some great clues. He mentions Dawn Shards. I don't know what they are, but I would guess Dawn Shards is the name of the swords that the Heralds had, potentially. He also mentions that Odium killed him. And he also mentions that Cultivation is better at seeing the future than him. So I have some guesses about Cultivation, and I feel really excited about them. So I would guess that Cultivation made her home or base, or where her mainness is, with the Shin. And the reason for that is because I remember that the Shin grow some things that they don't want anybody else to see, or they won't share secrets on how they're grown. They're full of truth, which would seem to be the opposite of Odium. And the cultivation, the opposite of to cultivate something, is to desolate something. And the last desolation is coming. So I would guess that Odium is who sends the storms. Odium is the center of the storm over there. And Odium is weirdly who Kaladin kind of like was / became. And I would guess that Surge Binders are of Odium. And then also, I would also guess that the Soulcasters, and we discover that Shallan is a Soulcaster who doesn't need a Soulcaster? No, it doesn't need, maybe I'm confusing some words here, but she can create stuff without using the device. She can just do it herself. That would be of Cultivation. So again, there seems to be some kind of like harmony between the two. But the last Desolation seems to come, I would guess, from Odium. And I think that what we've seen previously, because Shallan and, Jasnah has discovered the Parshmen being part of the Voidbringers and all of that, which is very confusing, but also juicy with the information we're given. I would say the last Desolation might be very different to what we've seen so far. And it has to be because it's the last one, right? So what makes it different? I don't know. But Desolation is the name of the shard, and Desolation is Odium. That's what I've figured out so far. But if that's the case, the Almighty, who was the Almighty? Because the Almighty wasn't Cultivation. And who was the Almighty's opposite? Would the Almighty's opposite be the person or the shard that created the Parshmen and the Parshendi? Maybe, but there's also a lot of different type of humanoids on this planet. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've got like the starts of some ideas. But that's the point, right? It's to figure it out as you read. Read and find out, as everybody would say. One thing I also noticed as well is that when he's mumbling and bumbling, the Almighty, he talks about maybe we could choose a champion. Maybe that'd be the best way to defeat Odium. He kind of mentions it as an afterthought, which means obviously it's going to be really important. So Kaladin would be our obvious choice right now. So maybe there's a prediction for way down the line, is that when all hope is lost and it looks like we're going to fail, Kaladin steps up, or whoever steps up and is the champion against Odium's champion. But I reckon Odium's champion is probably going to be about as powerful as it gets. So we'll see. But that's a prediction for much further down the line. Of course, I would like to mention a little bit about the Parshendi. So the Parshendi say Neshua Kadal when they see a Surge Binder, or particularly Kaladin. So that means something. They know about him. Maybe he's prophesized to them. And I feel like the Parshendi wrote the codes, by the way. And I've had this feeling for a little while, because they live by the codes, what seems to be much stronger than anybody else does. So I have a feeling the Parshendi wrote the codes, and there's a lot of crisscrossing in this, you know, a lot of crisscrossing with regards to the Parshendi and the Alethi, and it's just confusing. There's no like clear, obvious right and wrong. So that's why I feel like we're going to have to do some flip-flopping from sides. But the Parshendi are so obviously not evil that it's kind of painful to see the Alethi. The Alethi actually feel like the evil ones, you know, based on Sadeas and the other Alethi. Obviously not Dalinar, but like Dalinar has a feeling that what the Alethi are doing is wrong. But anyway, so the Parshendi, they have some kind of prophecy or know something, and they are going to link up with Dalinar and Kaladin 1000%. But why do the Parshendi fight in pairs? Why do they bring their women to the battlefield, or why would it seem that way? Why do they sing? Why don't they want anyone touching their bodies? Like, they're so mysterious that I have to know, and I hope we find out in the next book. So on to Shallan, and I say her name different every time, and I'm probably going to continue to do that. So it turns out the Soulcaster was fake, which is such an obvious answer, and it's very frustrating that I didn't get it. It's right staring you in the face, but obviously you just don't consider everything and think about all of it logically, because you're just enjoying the story. But yes, Soulcaster was fake. She and Jasnah are able to soulcast without the equipment, meaning that they are probably of an Order of the Radiance as well, some type of Order of the Radiance, so some kind of spren is related to them. I would guess maybe the spren related to them is the Symbol Heads, but because Jasnah did confirm that they are spren. However, they also have Shadesmar, and Shadesmar seems to be a place that these people can go, and This reminds me a lot, and if you've read The Wheel of Time, you'll know what this is. Reminds me a lot of Teleramriod. I think this is the introduction to Teleramriod, like for this book. So another indication of some inspiration taken from The Wheel of Time. And I know you can make arguments that there's only so many tropes in fantasy. And I know that Brandon Sanderson definitely isn't doing any kind of like copying, but you know, it's nice to see that inspiration is taken from different places. And I'm sure there's a Teleramriod style place in almost every single large fantasy book, but I just feel like he did take a lot of love from when he was finishing those books from Robert Jordan, and he wanted to create a masterpiece similar. So I feel like this is it. And if it's anything like just the payoff that I got from The Wheel of Time and the journey, you know, journey before destination, the journey was fantastic, but the payoff is amazing as well. And like, if it's anything like the enjoyment I had from the entirety of the series, then of The Wheel of Time, this is going to be one hell of a ride. But anyway, back to Shallan. It looks like they're going to be heading across to join the Shattered Plains. However, I am extremely interested in her backstory, and it turns out she did kill her father, and I'm pretty certain I did guess that previously. She has a Shardblade, which she hasn't mentioned to anybody about yet. Like, her backstory is very interesting, and the one thing that I keep coming back to, and I don't know if it's useless information, but the maps that her father was looking for, the Parshendi also were looking for maps. There's something somewhere that people are looking for, and I wouldn't be surprised if is it called Ghost Bloods? If the Ghost Bloods, a bit of a clumsy name, Ghost Bloods, if I'm honest, I wasn't very impressed with the name, but if the Ghost Bloods are looking for something, and it feels like the Ghost Bloods are chasing down the same avenue as Jasnah, but for a completely different reason. And I don't think that they want Odium to win, but I just think they have a completely different way of thinking about whatever's going to happen. So they're going to come at it from a completely different side. So I feel like I'm being very vague here, but it's just hard. Like, I know it's such a long series moving forwards, but I'm so excited. So I'm like trying to read into like every last thing. But basically, the storyline is interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading more. And then finally, we get him. We get the guy from the very first prelude or prologue, and his name, what's his name? Dalinar. And the reason I know it's him is, well, he says he's a herald, but also he died defending a waterway, and he's covered in water, or it looks like he's been swimming when he arrives. He has one of the herald's swords that doesn't disappear when you put it down. He's ripped, and he has dark eyes as well, which is going to be an interesting development. And Hoyd wouldn't be there if he wasn't extremely important. So he's a herald, and he was the one that was holding back the desolation, I believe, because he was the only one, or we were led to believe he was the only one who went back to the torture zone area as he was supposed to, the only one who held to the pact. And either he gave up and was spat out because of that, or for some other reason he was spat out. But we know the desolation is coming, and this guy is going to reveal some secrets if we get any more of him. I have a feeling we're not going to get any more of him for a little while. So what a cool way to end it. So, as you may be able to tell from watching this video, I loved this book for a bunch of reasons, and I'll go through them now. The first is the magnificent development of Kaladin, the many peaks and troughs of who this person is, including his backstory, interwoven throughout the entirety of the book, plus the dynamic with Bridge Team 4. And we see him in a lot of different lights. So we see a young him battling against what is believed to be his chosen destiny for him, which is being a surgeon. We see him begin his hatred for the Light Eyes. We then see him in the army and being absolutely useless and get the murder of his brother. And then we see him as a slave. And then we see him as somebody who inspires people just as a regular person and decides not to give up, even though he was on the precipice of leaping into the void. And then we see him become something supernatural. And then we see him at war. You just see so much, and it's a fantastic storyline, and Kaladin's my hero. We also get some fantastic teasing throughout and it's a bit more obvious, the teasing of Sanderson, than, again, I'm going to compare to the Wheel of Time, but it's a bit more obvious than the teasing of Robert Jordan. I feel like Robert Jordan's was very much the information's there, you can figure out if you want to, whereas Sanderson is so efficient that you know when you're being teased with information. Yeah, he does it in such a way where it's very difficult to understand why it's teasing you or how that information is teasing you. You just know it is. So for example, the Spren teased throughout, still don't really know what they do. The Parshendi and their role, so many clues as to what's happening there and why they're important and why they're not who the Alethi think they are, yet I still don't really know. So those are just two examples, and that was perfectly interwoven throughout the story without being clumsy. We also had Dalinar, and Dalinar is interesting because I don't think his character pops up too much. Yes, you have the old war dog oftentimes in books, someone to guide the way, but rarely do they become the prophet. Rarely do they become the one who can see the future or or the past, or chosen to be the prophet, as Dalinar clearly has been chosen, and he's becoming more and more important to the story rather than just fading away and guiding the characters. And he will guide the characters moving forwards, but he got so much page time, and he got development as well. So yeah, I enjoyed Dalinar's storyline. It's not one you tend to get very often in fantasy, I believe, with someone of his age getting more and more important as it goes along, rather than less and less important and being used as a guide. And so much groundwork was done. So many different races were mentioned, so many different types of magic were mentioned, different types of Spren, individual characters, awesome characters like the Night Watcher, who we haven't even met yet, but I am buzzing to meet. The Mistress, Axios, the Collector, I think his name was, those who were visiting the Shin as merchants, the heralds themselves, so many. And they were all sprinkled in, and what it did was it built my anticipation of the world to come, but also just builds such a depth to the world. And when you do that, when you mention things and past glories and cultures and all of those without going into massive depth on them straight away, you get like a really broad world. And what it does is it adds depth without having to over explain, because that's how it is in real life. In real life, you're not always going to get explanations. So your friend will be talking about their uncle or someone they know or something from back home, or this happened, that. They won't go into a ton of detail, but you know that that person has a rich life and history, and the world is happening away from what you're just focused on. And the way that he's done this, again, very Wheel of Time-ish, builds such a wide and deep world without having to over explain and bring me into everything. So it allows my brain to just work and feel the depth of the world and know it's there, and know that I'll explore more of it later without having to focus on it. And it was very well done. Shallan's story was great as well, because she was kind of like an anti-hero. Like, we knew that her intentions were impure from the beginning, and although I thought she was extremely likable, you could see that she was a bit morally grey based on, well, we now know that she killed her father, but you knew some dodgy things were happening back there anyway. You knew she wasn't an angel because she'd come to try and steal the Soulcaster, and she broke up the story really well, but she also added a ton of value to the story. And I very much hope that she is the main focus of the next book, because she rocks and I want to learn more about her. And she doesn't rock because she's just very moral. She rocks because she's ballsy and she's interesting. But also you don't always know exactly what she's going to do next. She's not going to just stick to high morals the whole time. She's going to do what she thinks is right for her, whilst interweaving some morals in there as well. So I really enjoyed the fact that she was a main character here. And not only that, she also allowed us to look into the magical and philosophical side of things a lot more and deepen the world, whereas obviously Kaladin and Dalinar's storylines did allow us to deepen the world, but they were very much focused around the Shattered Plains. Extremely hyper-focused around the Shattered Plains. And then we had Zeph, who was awesome. We have multiple extra characters who were thrown in there. None of it felt forced, and although we didn't get a lot of them, some of the characters I mentioned previously, we got enough where when we next pick up their story, I'll remember what happened and I'm very interested in it. And this is Brandon Sanderson's best novel by, well, not really a novel, but his best book that I've read by a country mile. if you don't include obviously the works that he finished with the Wheel of Time. I think the Gathering Storm, blew me away. That was the first one that he finished of, and obviously the next two of the Wheel of Time were amazing as well. But anyway, of novels that were, I could call them novels, of books that were just his, this is much better than the Mistborn trilogy. Much better than Warbreaker, obviously, but Warbreaker is one contained story. And obviously I read this Secret History as well, but you can't really compare that to this. Like, that's just like a supplement. And the weird question is, well, what am I going to read next? Normally when I'm reading these larger series, I like to put a book in between so that I don't burn myself out, which may not be the best for you as the viewer. So what I decided to do was just go straight into it. I'm going to read Words of Radiance, which is book 2 of the Stormlight Archive, simply because I can't imagine not jumping right back into it and reading it, because I had such an amazing time and I'm invested in the characters. So I will see you in the next video where I will have started the Words of Radiance. Thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, recommend to other people who like these series. I've done this with a bunch of series on the channel and I really enjoy doing it. So the more people that watch, the more success the channel has, the more I can do it. So a beautiful circle. I will see you next Sunday, 10 AM Central Time.